Good afternoon, everyone, and thanks for taking the time to tune in to our India in Market webinar. I'm Ashley Ridley from State Promotions, Department for Trade and Investment, and I'm your host for today. Well, following the success of our first two series of global in-market webinars, which consisted of 12 webinars and a total viewing audience of over 700 attendees, I'm now pleased to welcome you to our third webinar for series number 3. So today we are joined by our in-market expert friends from Austrade India, Stuart Rees, Trade Investment Commissioner at Bengaluru, and Yaser Siddiqui, the Business Development Manager in Delhi. Stuart's going to discuss the latest market insights on COVID-19 and what the future might look like post-COVID. And Yaser will follow on with a bit of a deep dive into the wine sector. So allowing time for questions all up, I anticipate this webinar should run for approximately half an hour. So before I hand you over to Stuart, as always, I'd just like to share a few logistical items. So apologies again if you've heard these previously. This session is being recorded and will be uploaded to the department's website. At any time during the webinar, you can ask questions or provide feedback through the Q&A section on the right-hand side of your screen. However, please ensure your question is directed to all panelists rather than specifically to one, as this ensures I can see your question or comments. If we do run out of time, we'll include any unanswered questions and the answers onto our website, and I'll personally also make a point to follow up with you directly and connect you to the most appropriate departmental representative. And lastly, we will have a 10-second poll pop up at the end of the webinar, so please do take the time to complete this for us to continually improve our communications to you. So now I'd like to introduce you to Austrade India representatives, Stuart Rees and Yaser Siddiqui. Good afternoon, Stuart and Yaser. Great to have you with us today.
Ashley, yeah, I'm very happy to be here and give you a bit of an update on what we can see and hear happening on the ground of the Indian subcontinent at the moment. As everybody can appreciate, it's a very fluid situation. And so this is really a mix of insights from conversations that we're having with business in India, a bit of updates from newspapers locally, and of course, some of our more recent reporting back to our masters in Canberra. Well, India's halfway through its third lockdown, which is due to finish on May 17th. But Telangana state, which covers Hyderabad, has already announced that it's extending the lockdown to the end of May. Other states, we think, are likely to follow suit. There's been a bit of a spike in cases over the weekend in the Punjab and Tamil Nadu, and the latest from speaking with people in Mumbai today is that they've started building tent hospitals on the cricket pitches over the weekend. The rise in active cases is occurring alongside an increased testing rate. So it is positive that India is trying to get a grip on how widespread the virus is, but it is also somewhat disturbing that it seems COVID-19 is more prevalent than, say, was expected a week ago. And there'll undoubtedly be an increase as India's huge repatriation effort gets underway, which is potentially bringing back several 100,000 people home to India from the Middle East and other countries. About this repatriation, these returns are going to lead to a huge drop in international remittances to the states like Kerala, Maharashtra and Karnataka, and a lot of hardship and drop in consumption ability to those affected families. But it also is indicating that there'll be a long tail of impacted sectors like construction resuming fully in the Middle East. So there'll be some longer term impacts there from what India is doing to return its people. Within India, the lockdown strategy is having its challenges, particularly when it comes to internal migrant workers who are still in pretty large numbers trying to get back to their own families and support structures in those states. Now, some states are beginning to resist the calls to facilitate the migration, A, because it might spread the virus, but also B, because these workers are really needed to keep the economy going. Now, imagine on the call today that most of the people have heard about India's classification of districts across the country into red, orange and green zones. All of the major cities in India are in what's called red zones. And for people that live in these, as most of Austrade's locally engaged staff do at the moment, they're almost completely dependent on the government delivering supplies to the door. And if they get outside or step outside without a pass, they're likely to be in a bit of trouble from the local authorities. So it's not a great situation. And for people and businesses within the orange or green zones, while they may not technically be as locked down so severely, they can't commute into the cities to workplaces. They can't get their supplies for production. And so for there also, life is nothing like normal at the moment. As it stands, businesses are permitted by the central government to operate with about a third of their staff. And movement of all goods is supposedly allowed. And mum and dad type shops are allowed to open, with the best attempts, of course, for anybody attending those shops or buying things there to practice social distancing as much as you can, and along with wearing face masks. But we do know that some manufacturing businesses, even within, say, critical supply industries and being part of international medical supply chains, that for them, continuing production is still next to impossible. With local and international logistics broken, they can't get the supplies they need. And on top of that, local authorities in some districts are applying their own interpretation of who can and can't work, just to add to the uncertainty. The zoning and stepped approach is how India is going to manage its getting its economy going. Like other countries, it's spent the last few weeks building up its capability to manage localized lockdowns and restarts. But if restarting its economy is going to be dependent on how you can undertake mass testing, as well as being able to respond quickly to new outbreaks, India is preparing for this. It's got a new tracing app. It's a bit more authoritarian than what you'd be happy with in Australia. I mean, it hands the government your age, your address, your travel history by GPS location data, as well as proximity to others through Bluetooth, which that last point is a bit like what we've got in Australia. And while it's not compulsory, it is mandatory for government employees, and likewise all the major employer groups and landlords in residential zones are stipulating that this has to be loaded on your phone if you want to be around there. Some cities are also reportedly fining and threatening to arrest anybody that fails to install it on their phone. And one commentator said last week that pre-corona, if we were sleepwalking into a surveillance state, well, we are now panic running into a super surveillance state. But despite this type of commentary, it is a more popular download than, say, Pokemon Go was a few years ago. And hopefully this is not a sign of coercion so much, but more the seriousness that the community is taking its own role in being part of the recovery, just like it's hoped is going to be the way in Australia going forward. India, unlike most countries, has on its side a pharmaceutical sector which is capable of producing at scale. And there is a number of pharma companies actively involved already in the production of ingredients for COVID targeting drugs. And there's several of them that are also part of international collaborations on vaccine development. And last week, the Council of Scientific and Industrial Research announced the deployment of a paper-based strip called Feluda, which is being upscaled for deployment now by Tata Industries. I think a couple of these points I've just mentioned is that how, despite seeming disorder, India is capable of some remarkable achievements, and it's remaining a player on the global stage. And so for those of you that are already active in the market or considering it, we ask that you keep this in mind and maintain a bit of optimism about the country. Now, unfortunately for food and beverage exporters at the moment, HoReCa, the malls, the restaurants, salons, resorts, and so forth are closed, which means most of the formats for how Indians get access to and consume Australian products are closed. The exception to this is the supermarkets, and most of them are operating. We think demand overall for premium Australian product, which is targeting high, middle to top income households, will probably prove to be fairly resilient. That is, if the product is available and can make its way onto the market. And this was indicated in a call to us last Friday with Food Hall that said that its premium food segment is one that is continuing to grow. Mid-tier supermarkets, on the other hand, that are targeting lower to mid-income families, such as the likes of Big Bazaar, they are seeing a flight to value or an increase in price sensitivity, with their customers tending to purchase the lower cost items within each category. Now, this flight to value versus where the expanding market is in premium segment is, I think, something all exporters of food and beverage product in Australia need to think about. And think about not just for India, but also other countries which are broadly described as price sensitive. And what I mean here is that the key to success going forward is more so about marketing than it is about value. And this is especially true in the online world. We don't know what normality in sales is going to look like, and we won't until all of the formats or centres of demand are up and running, and we won't know until the entire logistics, warehouse, customs and so forth part of international business is up and running right up to the doors of businesses in Australia. And we also don't know if HoReCa will be as much as a driver of demand as once anticipated, not so long ago, at least for the short term. What we're thinking about here is, will people be less inclined to go out and drink around strangers as they used to, or will they pretty quickly forget about Corona and the present situation? Will it become a distant memory? And with India having such a young population and an increasingly professional and internationally connected one, especially within the target groups where we are focused on, we actually anticipate it's going to be the latter. What we do know is that the normal is going to look very different for at least the short and medium term. The reality is that there's going to be rolling lockdowns in different parts of the country, and they'll occur for quite some time. And that's going to make identifying demand or supply chokes difficult to identify and even harder to resolve. So even when, say, something like the new normal trade does kick off again, we and DFAT at the High Commission and the other consulates will really be relying on Australian exporters to let us know when things go wrong so that we can work with local authorities to help find a resolution. So never assume that we know that there is a problem. Let us know. E-commerce is a positive story at the moment. As a market entry strategy, it's something we are going to increasingly hammer on about, and probably not just in India. If you've not got a digital strategy or an online marketing strategy yet, or you're not helping originate sales for your representatives internationally in a digital format, you can be pretty sure that your competitors are doing that. And in the case of consumers going digital, that growth category, the premium side of things, Food Hall is now doing about 80% of its business online, and they expect that to continue. And that's despite being physically, in most cases, open for business. But before I get too far down that rabbit hole, I'll leave that for Yaser to say a few more things about, as well as alcohol and wine sales in a few minutes. For food exporters, in a helpful sign, the Food Safety and Standards Authority of India has aligned its national food codes for about 1,500 imported products, which match India's ITCHS code. So this is going to help Australian exporters register products in the market. For ag equipment, the stress on India's grain system at the moment through labour shortages and logistics disruption has triggered some renewed interest in on-farm storage and handling for bulk grains, which is presenting an opportunity for Australian manufacturers of silos, augers, and so forth. And as for the education sector, while the families that send children to Australia undoubtedly will be impacted by coronavirus, Australia remains an affordable destination in relation to our competitors. And thankfully, because we have less incidents of coronavirus to date, from a safety perspective, we actually end up being more attractive. This isn't something we can take for granted. A lot of this is going to rely on the perceptions within India of how Australia's Federal, state governments, its education sector and its community has treated its children, India's children, and its youth during a time of crisis like this. Trade is continuing to trickle through in both directions. In India, the major ports are operating, but clearances are taking longer, with medical and critical supplies being prioritised. Likewise, Sri Lanka and Bangladesh, we've been able to help companies get product moving through the ports to consumers, but there is a lot of congestion. Thankfully, to date, there's been enough power leads to keep refrigerated boxes operational. So we think product spoilage has been minimal. And while the air freight system is broken, I'm hoping that some, at least on the call today, had some product on the first Singapore Airlines flight of last week, which was supported by the International Freight Assistance Mechanism, or IFAM. Austrade has about 10% of its workforce working day and night on IFAM at the moment, and we're currently nearing the end stages of building up to phase 2, which is going to mean more airspace being available for products beyond ag and food. Look, I'd like to have a looking glass and let everybody know what the future is going to look like, but it is just too early to tell. While in Australia, we seem to have a resumption of activities and resumption of normal sort of economic activity, if I can call it that, mapped out. In India, it still remains too fluid. GDP forecasts are widely varying. Some say India is going to be one of the few countries to actually show positive growth this financial year, whereas others are painting a bleaker picture. We just don't know. It certainly needs to continue its development, and the government is still releasing things like infrastructure plans, but we think some of that economic infrastructure development and investment is likely to take a bit of a back seat for a while. And like everything, it'll depend on how India manages the implementation of its plans as well as what it can afford. But for the Maharashtra government, at least, it's actually declared a freeze on investment and capital works till March next year, and its cut on its development spend is said to be the deepest since 1960. I wanted to mention where India sits in relations to companies potentially diversifying supply chains. It is making the right noise. It's talking about freeing up land, but beyond its positive signalling, bureaucratically, the government authorities, as well as local businesses that investors have to engage with, need to up their game. The movement of complex supply chains to India, if left to the private sector alone, could take years to unravel, but pressure and possible incentives from governments around the world could accelerate that movement. But not just for COVID and the recovery of the economy, but for developing a welcoming ecosystem for business and international investment. It needs to eliminate a lot of the ambiguity and complexity that exists across the country. And I think if they can focus on doing that now, and doing something now and in the short term, it'll help logistics and supply chains more easily reconnect with demand and they'll get its own economy kick-started as quickly as can be, and that'll benefit us all. So look, my last message is to convey to you all that India remains a priority as a country for trade, a source of investment, and for advancing the other national interests of Australia. It's got the advantage of having a young population who are likely to be less affected in a physical sense from COVID-ID. And so it's going to grow in importance to Australia and the world as we all learn how to live with the virus. We at Austrade remain functional, some of us from afar, but with the South Australian government, we're going to continue our best efforts to help you navigate this and understand what the new reality will look like. So with that said, I've probably gone a tad over time. I'll hand over to my colleague and Senior Business Development Manager, Yaser Siddiqui, for some of his insights, and then we'll both be happy to take some questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Stu, and good day, everyone. I'm coming to you live from Delhi, and today is 48th day of lockdown. Thank you to the SA government. Thank you to Leonie Muldoon and the team particularly to Ashley, who has pulled this together. I'm really excited to speaking to with South Asian exporters again after e-commerce webinar last month. Today, as Stuart mentioned, I'll be talking about wine during COVID and most importantly post-COVID. As Stuart mentioned earlier, I wanted to first reiterate the most important thing that has happened in India for Australian exporters and has accelerated as a result of COVID is e-commerce. As India and Australia starts to bounce back after COVID, we think that Australian companies should be positioned to be able to sell online in India as large investments in infrastructure and supply chain means that e-commerce has become the single largest retail channel of foreign goods. Imagine reaching every street address across India in 5 days and most of them in 2 days. We have an Australian store on Amazon India, which has resumed deliveries and already has several of South Australian brands and more to be listed soon. Now, talking about wine. Well, that's a touchy subject. The wine market in India has been impacted hard as the entire eating out and restaurant industry has shut down indefinitely. India, as many of you know, I'm just seeing a couple of attendees here, and I've met them I have met you guys in India before. Is a highly protectionist country when it comes to wine alcohol, with import tariffs over 150% on wine. Look, this isn't going to reduce in future. However, alcohol continues to be the single largest revenue generator for the state governments. Alcohol has always been a state-driven subject, as many of you know. And this has further proven with Delhi, Haryana, Andhra Pradesh, and several states have put extra corona tax, which is around 70 to 75% on the sale of alcohol. This is surely a revenue raiser for the state government. However, as you must have seen in media, in India as well as Australia, consumers continue to throng stores even during COVID. Now, when it comes to the imported wines, the premium consumers are seeking change and variety in their taste after lockdown. The question remains, is the distribution channel and of course the hotels and restaurants, which accounts for over 60% sale of imported wine in India. It is imperative for imported wines that the sector bounces back and quickly. Uh, Something new for everyone, India for the first time ever is mulling an e-commerce led distribution for alcohol, including wine in India. Several states such as West Bengal, Tamil Nadu, Andhra Pradesh have already started their deliveries, which include imported wines and a notable winery from Barossa Valley. Private players such as Zomato are also gearing up their backend to deliver wine via food delivery platforms, which is expected to be the next big thing in India. Well, in terms of Australia, we are a well-known, reputable partner with a strong brand portfolio and a sizable share in the market. As I mentioned earlier, the sale of Australian wines is impacted. However, with retail opening up slowly, online and phone deliveries, hotels and restaurants now being allowed to retail wines, we expect consumers to continue buying of wine despite the taxes. Coming to the price points, as Marcus, who is also there, one of the attendees, he asked me to speak about this. Look, there's a strong market for bottle price between Australian 25 to 40 dollars per bottle at retail. High duties and taxes on imported wine means importers ideally look to pay a low FOB price, which is around $2 to $4 per FOB per bottle. Remember, the custom duty is around 150%, which excludes the state taxes, which differs from state to state. As a rule of thumb, the retail price of any imported wine in India is 8 times the FOB price. This is applicable for everyone as none of the FTAs have any alcohol exceptions. So there's a level playing field for everyone. However, having said that, there are several Australian wineries which are at the premium range and have found willing importers and partners in India. However, the kicker here is they also offer an entry level, which in a way helps them to sell their premium range. Having said that, there's a customer at both the medium and premium range. It's important to find a good importer who is ready to invest time and money to build your label in the market. We at Austrade India have a great network of qualified importers and are keen to introduce them to you. Talking about which wineries have done well in India, South Asian exporters that are able to offer a range of varieties, quality and price points, and willingness as well as being patient have done well in India. Once again, to reiterate here, remember wine is a luxury drink in India. It's not a social drink. And Indian wine drinkers are primarily brand-focused purchasers. Australia has a great image in India, particularly for clean, green, safe, reliable produce. So what's the future for SA wineries in India? Well, the growing Indian wine market offers South Australian winemakers an opportunity to engage at mid-tier price level. Growth factors include the rising middle class, which Stuart mentioned earlier, a trend towards wine rather than spirits, and the status associated with wine mean the market is on a strong upward trajectory, regardless of what's happening now, and the significant non-tariff as well as tariff barriers. We hosted several South Australian wineries such as Taylor Wines, Brothers in Arms Vineyard, 8 at the Gate Wines, Nova Vita Wines earlier this year at the Australia India Business Exchange. We expect that several will continue commercial discussions with the importers, and a couple of them already registering the labels for the market. Well, if you're looking to hear more on the impact and opportunities, please join our webinar on 20th May with India's leading sommelier, Magandeep Singh, which I'm sure everyone would be familiar with. He's a Penfolds graduate and owner of 5 RM William booths and a big fan of South Australia. Thank you, and over to you, Ashley.
Thanks, Stuart and Yaser. That was absolutely fabulous. A great insight into the India market. It was really interesting to hear about some of the challenges in India, and we're really sorry to hear that you were in complete lockdown there. It sounds really traumatic, as well as, of course, the many opportunities that our South Australian companies can tap into. So now we've come to the interactive part of this forum where our attendees can ask our presenters any questions. And from previous feedback we've received, this is an area which our viewers really look forward to. So don't be shy. While we have our Austrade friends online, this is a fantastic opportunity for you to raise a query or comment that's of relevance or interest to you. So please, again, submit your question through the right-hand side of your screen, or if you're using a mobile device, click on the 3 dots and you'll see the Q&A feature appear. So we've actually got a couple of questions already for you, Stuart and Yaser, so perhaps we'll get started while some more questions filter through. So you did touch on about the products moving through into India. Someone's actually asked whether there has been any impact on shipping or products moving through customs in India. Stuart, would you like to take that one on board?
Yes, I would, and I was on hold. Yeah, okay. So we did go through a stage where the ports just weren't functioning really at all. They have started to move product through, albeit very slowly. Now, the central government has been putting pressure on the major port operators to waive fees for containers that are stuck there. The big operators at this stage declining to do so. Look, things are trickling through, but I would describe it just as a trickle at this stage, and that applies to Bangladesh and Sri Lanka also. Look, where we've been aware of issues of Australian products stuck there, particularly perishable goods, we've been able to intervene and get the attention of the local port authorities and customs to get the product moving and onto the shelves or onto the e-commerce bikes, as it might be.
So, and you did offer your services earlier through your presentation as well, that if there are any issues to let you know, of course, and you can perhaps provide some support. That's correct, isn't it?
Yeah, look, that's right. The thing is that we've got to know that there's a problem before we can do anything.
Perfect. Thanks, Stuart. Actually, one of my colleagues, Justin Harmon, has asked a question for you, Yaser. Who are the wine importers servicing the new online sales, and are they existing importers or new ones specific to that platform?
Hi, Justin. Hope you're doing well. Well, these are all existing importers because they already have supply chain in place. Some of them are state-run e-commerce platforms, which means that the labels which are registered in those states are being only sold. However, we hear that there are private e-commerce platforms which will be soon selling alcohol, and the supply would always be the existing importers.
I hope that's answered your question there, Justin. If you need some more information, yes, I would be happy to talk to you perhaps after the session. You touched on, Stuart, about moving forward into digital platforms. Perhaps with COVID-19, what is the best way for SA companies to work with their buyers in India? Along with the digital platforms, are there any cultural sensitivities surrounding these? Is there some little tips that you can provide?
I might break it up into 2 parts of the question, actually. I think at this point in time, if you've got an importer or distributor that you would normally work with, you've got to reach out and show them as much support as possible. They are part of your family's business, really, and they are also doing it tough. And I think while we are doing it tough here in Australia, it's, I think, a prudent approach would be to support them in terms of helping their transition to go online and help them originate sales, perhaps through different formats that you may not have used previously, whether it's like on a WhatsApp or a LinkedIn or, say Facebook groups. I think those are going to be very, very important ways for businesses in India to connect with their customer base. In terms of cultural sensitivities at this point in time, look, nothing truly obvious is coming through. Be aware that the country and many others in the world are going through Ramadan at the moment. So we did have a couple of instances during the week where Australians were giving analogies talking about, BLT sandwiches and building upon them. And we just thought, well, just keep away from talking about food and how good bacon is at the moment. But look, that's about it. Yaser, do you want to touch on anything there? Are you seeing anything obvious that people should be aware of at this point in time, cultural sensitivity wise?
Thanks, Stuart. I think India has always been a relationship-driven market. And I'll give you an example of an Australian brand, which I won't name it, but they are into health and wellness space. And currently they're not selling because they can't sell. However, they are on Instagram trying to create a value of the brand, talk to the consumers, not directly selling the brand, but talk about health and wellness, health and wellness being of their customers, talk about, world coming together, all the positive notions. I think that will go a long way to build the rapport with the customer, which eventually will turn to the brand once it's available. So it's important to continue maintain a relationship, and I think the message is very loud and clear that we are all in this together, and it's not about only selling, but it's also about maintaining the relationships. So I think that's a message I have seen a lot of Australian brands already doing in the market.
That's great. A fairly generic question, and I think you did cover some of these through your presentation, Stuart, but perhaps you can elaborate on this question. What is seen to be the best opportunities for commodities or services seen in India currently, and your thoughts perhaps post-COVID-19? And I know you did mention if you could see, look through a looking glass type thing into the future, but if you can perhaps elaborate and give some thoughts there.
Yes, so having given my disclaimer up front, to delve into areas, I think some sectors are going to look a lot closer at automation technologies and so forth, that where you can utilize machinery better to replace people that might otherwise be working in close proximity. Now, the agricultural sector is ripe for some sort of change in that country, but with the sheer number of migrants returning from offshore to work and returning to their villages, likewise also the internal migrants that are moving back to, in many cases, rural zones, there is a bit of tension there. We have started to see inquiry coming through from some of the big mining houses for new technology and new equipment in the mining space. Clearly, they have some challenges there in increasing their profitability. But with the economy kind of having not ground to a halt, but operating at probably 50%, at best guess at the moment, we are looking for the silver linings, and believe me, we'll be letting Australia know when we see them.
Excellent, thank you. Perhaps this one is for you, Yaser. As a wine exporter, considering the India market, what's the pricing levels like, and how should they look to negotiate such pricing?
Thanks, Ashley. So in terms of pricing, as I mentioned here, FOB $2 to $4 per bottle, Australian dollar per bottle, is somewhat something what importers are looking for. However, there are a few wineries which are selling 6 to 8 FOB per bottle. So it all depends on the importer and the market which he's catering to. In terms of pricing, yes, it's very important to negotiate. Indians are very hard negotiators, and we love to negotiate for even a penny. Well, it's important for SA wineries to focus on the label, the quality, and the story of the winery, because I have seen the young Indian consumer, they dig that. I mean, they would like to know more about the wines. For example, I'll give an example of Richard Dolan wines by Jeff Hardy. the way the label sits, and um, uh, the frequency of visits he has made to the market has really helped connecting with the importer as well as consumers. It's also important to tell the story of the wine in terms of how old is the winery, and is it a family owned? So people like to hear that stuff. It's also important to promote your wines, everywhere in the world, via through influencers and hotels and restaurants. We at Austrade have worked with SA in the past and continue to work with SA wineries individually as well to promote those wines.
That's great, and we do appreciate your support, so thank you, Yaser. This is the last question we have available at the moment, so any last minute questions, please submit them now, otherwise we'll be wrapping up following this question. Stuart, you had actually touched on Australia remaining an attractive destination for international students, but you did indicate that this may be dependent on how we treat those students. How have we fared so far? Have we been seen in a positive light, and has there been any media surrounding this so-called treatment?
Look, thanks. Yes, there has been media around the treatment of Indian students in Australia, and there have been international surveys taking place, trying to get a read of the current perceptions for how Australia is placed in relation to other countries. Look, Australia's not doing or not faring too badly here. Parents seem to think that, you know, Australia, Canada actually are doing okay in this space. I think there's a high level of fear for people that are in other countries. We've seen that about 25,000 roughly people have requested to be repatriated or registered to be repatriated from the USA, of all things. Now, a couple of months ago, that would have been unheard of. Similarly, not a vastly different number of people wanting to be repatriated from the UK. So those are our two biggest competitors, if you want, in this space, as a competitor for students from India. Look, in Australia, I know each state government's looking at different things that they can do to support international students, and they are being rolled out. I think every effort that is made is going to position Australia in a much stronger space going forward to actually be a preferred destination and a safer and more trusted destination for Indian parents to send their children to going forward.
Well, that's great. Well, that's all the questions we have for you two. So thank you so much for taking part. To our viewers, local industry has so much government support. We have a number of South Australian trade and investment officers and representatives located overseas. We work closely with federal government and in particular our friends in Austrade. We have excellent locally based staff and my fellow departmental colleagues, such as our international markets teams, our sector focused teams, our trade start advisors. So get in touch with us if you need support. As mentioned, this comes to the end of our webinar. Thanks, Stuart and Yaser. It's been fantastic having Austrade India involved again. Big thank you to you both. To our viewers, please do take the time now to complete the short poll that's now on screen. Remember, you can submit feedback and suggestions for future topics, such as longer Q&A time, for instance, like we've tried to do just then. We really do listen. These webinars are for you. We want to help you. We want to ensure you have the latest reliable information directly from our South Australian in-market representatives. But we do need to know what works and if this is the right format. So please share that with us. Lastly, I hope you can join us tomorrow morning at 11:30 for our next in-market Japan update. We welcome back Sally Townsend, South Australia's representative in Japan, to provide a general market update, as well as a member from our international education sector team to provide a bit of an insight on the current international education situation in Japan. So thank you everyone for tuning in. I hope you have a lovely day. Thanks, Stuart. Thanks, Yaser.
Thank you, Ashley. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Ashley. Thank you.